There are over 30 million people, mainly spread across 4 countries, and they don't have a state. Promised a homeland after World War I, the Kurds were instead divided, suppressed, and pushed into the margins of Middle Eastern politics. But today, Kurdish fighters control territory, run their own governments, and shape regional wars. From Iraq to Syria, the question becomes louder: are the Kurds closer than ever to independence or further away than they've ever been? For the first time in Syria's modern history, the Kurds are being granted fundamental rights. Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara has signed a decree granting Kurds citizenship rights and officially recognizing Kurdish as a national language. The announcement was reported by Syria's state news agency. It marks the first formal recognition of Kurdish national rights since Syria gained independence in 1946. In a televised address, President al-Shara called on Syria's Kurds to actively take part in rebuilding the nation. The move comes in the aftermath of violent clashes that recently erupted in the northern city of Aleppo, where at least 23 people were killed, according to Syria's Ministry of Health. Those clashes followed tense negotiations between the government in Damascus and the Kurdish-dominated Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, which control much of northeastern Syria. Interim President al-Shara has pledged to reunify the country after 14 years of war. Under the agreement, Kurdish-controlled areas will eventually return to Damascus's authority in exchange for expanded Kurdish rights. Under the Assad family, the Kurdish minority was systematically repressed. Bashar al-Assad was overthrown in December 2024, ending decades of rule. The Kurds, today the largest people in the world without their own state, live mainly across Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. In Syria alone, around 20% of Kurds lost their citizenship during a controversial census in 1962. Those who were rendered stateless will now regain Syrian nationality. The decree also elevates the Kurdish New Year to the status of a national holiday, a historic shift or a fragile promise in a country still struggling to heal. The authorities in the Kurdish region want to go further and have the rights of the Kurds enshrined in the constitution. They point out that decrees can easily be reversed. For more than a century, the Kurds have asked the same question: will we ever get our own state? With over 30 million people spread across Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Syria, the Kurds are the largest stateless nation in the world. Historically, the odds have been stacked against them. At the Paris Peace Conference of 1919, following the end of the First World War, the Kurdish delegation, led by Ottoman diplomat Sharif Pasha, presented a memorandum calling for an independent Kurdistan. After World War I was over, the conference would withdraw the borders of Europe and the Middle East. US President Woodrow Wilson had championed the principle of self-determination for all peoples, and the Kurds seized that promise with both hands. Attached to Pasha's memorandum was a map showing an ambitious Kurdish state. In the northwest, its borders stretched from the Euphrates River, in the southeast all the way to the Iranian city of Kermanshah. In the northeast, Kurdistan extended between Lake Van and Lake Urmia. In the southwest, major cities like Mosul and Kirkuk were included. It was an impressive claim, but even as the conference was underway, telegrams began arriving from Kurdish tribal leaders declaring that Pasha did not represent them at all. For different reasons, they rejected his vision. Some accused him of striking a secret deal with the Armenian delegation, handing over territory around Lake Van. Others condemned his call for independence outright and instead praised their brotherhood with the Turks. Frustrated and isolated, Pasha resigned. The years immediately following the First World War would prove decisive for Kurdistan. The borders that still divide Kurdish lands today were redrawn during this period. The Kurds inhabit roughly 425,000 square kilometers across the Taurus Mountains in Turkey, the Zagros Mountains in Iran, and their extensions into Syria and Iraq. It is a harsh, mountainous region, with peaks over 4,000 meters high, where mighty rivers like the Euphrates and Tigris are born. Today's unrest has its roots in the post-war era. Only then did a sense of Kurdish national identity begin to emerge, even though an independent Kurdistan had never existed. Kurdish society has always been divided into tribes, speaking different dialects and following different political loyalties, and that diversity has existed for centuries. Yet, one thing unites all Kurds: the land itself. Where they live has always been central to their identity. Kurds see themselves as a proud and courageous mountain people. As the saying goes, the Kurds have no friends but the mountains. Even their origin myth reflects this bond. One of the most famous legends claims that Kurds descend from children hidden in the mountains to escape the two men-eating snakes growing from the shoulders of the tyrant king Zakhak. Kurdish nationalists searching for their roots, serious Kurdish historiography only began in 1936, linked their origins to the ancient Medes, who lived in the Zagros Mountains around 600 BCE. But there is no solid historical evidence for this claim, nor for the idea that the Medes conquered the lands now inhabited by Kurdish tribes. The earliest historical reference to the Kurds date to around the year 900. Arab historians described al-Akrat as nomadic tribes speaking Persian dialects who had converted to Islam. They lived mainly from livestock herding, but also supplied soldiers to Islamic armies fighting the Byzantine Empire and the European Crusaders. In 1157, Sultan Sanjar of the Seljuk Empire officially created the province of Kurdistan, covering the eastern Zagros Mountains, parts of modern Iran and Iraq. The Silk Road ran straight through the region, bringing prosperity in times of peace. Ancient Kurdish cities like Bitlis and Diyarbakir flourished. That stability collapsed with the Mongol invasions of the 13th and 14th centuries. Chaos and fragmentation followed. The Seljuk Empire disintegrated, and Kurdish tribes abandoned cities and villages to seek refuge in the mountains. After the Mongol era, the Ottoman Empire and Persian Safavid Empire fought for control over eastern Anatolia. Kurdish tribes skillfully navigated the conflict, shifting allegiance to whoever offered the best deal. Ultimately, the Ottomans emerged victorious in 1639. Most Kurdish tribes had already sided with Sultan Selim in Istanbul, preferring Sunni Islam over the Safavids' Shiite faith. In return for loyalty, Selim promised the Kurds relative autonomy. Tribal leaders retained local power while guarding the empire's eastern frontier, a cheap and effective form of border defense. This arrangement ushered in a golden age for the Kurds. For nearly 2 centuries, there was relative peace. The Ottomans largely ignored this remote region. Kurdish society remained tribal without a strong central ruler, as leaders focused on maximizing local power. In the 19th century, Russia advanced through the Caucasus, presenting itself as the protector of Christian Armenians living across eastern Anatolia. Tensions exploded. Sultan Abdulhamid II gave Kurdish militias free rein to restore order. Between 1894 and 1896, hundreds of thousands of Armenians were killed or expelled. As the First World War approached, ethnic identity became increasingly important. European cartographers produced the first ethnographic maps of Kurdistan, sharply dividing populations that had lived side by side for centuries. The great powers turned their attention to the region as the weakening Ottoman Empire threatened to destabilize their Middle Eastern ambitions. During the war, Kurdistan became a land of extreme violence. The Ottoman army suffered defeats against advancing Russian forces. In revenge, the Turks unleashed mass violence against the Tsar's perceived allies. Up to 1.5 million Armenians were systematically killed. Kurdish fighters fought alongside the Ottomans and participated in the violence, though Kurds themselves were also deported. Disease and famine ravaged the region by war's end. The Paris peace talks resulted in the Treaty of Sèvres. In August 1920, the Ottoman Empire was carved apart. Only a small Turkish core remained. Armenia gained independence in eastern Anatolia, and for the Kurds, the treaty promised an autonomous and eventually independent Kurdistan, spanning parts of modern Iraq, Syria. Few believed it would actually happen. Britain initially supported a Kurdish buffer state to cheaply secure its mandate borders, but quickly lost faith due to Kurdish divisions. Prime Minister Lloyd George complained that no Kurd seems to represent anyone beyond his own clan. The Treaty of Sèvres never took effect. Led by Mustafa Kemal, Turkish nationalist forces fought both the European powers and the Ottoman Sultan. With Kurdish support, they expelled foreign armies during the Turkish War of Independence. The 1923 Treaty of Lausanne fixed Turkey's modern borders and erased Kurdistan from the map. The seed of an independent Kurdistan had been planted, but never took root. Wilson's promise of self-determination bypassed the Kurds entirely. Turkish and British promises of autonomy evaporated. Kurdish uprisings in the 1920s and 1930s were crushed one by one. In Turkey, repression was especially harsh. Kurdish identity was denied, and Kurds were labeled Mountain Turks. In the 1980s, the PKK, led by Abdullah Öcalan, launched an armed struggle against the Turkish state, demanding independence. Öcalan, imprisoned since 1999, later pursued negotiations, but violence has flared up again, driven by developments in neighboring countries. The Gulf War, the Iraq War, the fight against the Islamic State, and the Syrian civil war transformed Kurdish fortunes. In Iraq, the Kurdistan National Government gained internationally recognized autonomy. In northern Syria, Rojava became de facto self-governing. The Kurdish autonomous region in Iraq was hard-won after decades of conflict with Saddam Hussein's regime and chemical attacks in 1988. The Kurds seized their chance after the Gulf War. It failed. True autonomy only arrived after the US invasion of Iraq in 2003, thanks largely to close cooperation with American forces. Once again, the Kurds did the dirty work for others. Kurdish fighters became the backbone of the ground war against the Islamic State, earning a reputation as masters of guerrilla warfare in hostile terrain. For centuries, Kurds benefited from living in borderlands before borders hardened in 1923. They moved freely with their herds. Later, they profited from smuggling. Fighters crossed borders with ease, but modern surveillance, fences, mines, and drones have changed that. States now cling tightly to the region's strategic resources, oil and water. Turkey, in particular, is determined to prevent Kurdish unity. President Erdogan fears a continuous Kurdish zone along Turkey's southern border. That fear has driven repeated Turkish military incursions into northern Syria. A united, independent Kurdistan now seems further away than ever. Kurdish divisions persist. Kurds in Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran all pursue their own interests. Sometimes those align, often they don't. One reality remains unchanged. Throughout history, the Kurds have lived on the periphery of other states, and they still do today.